All right, welcome to our panel about faith and fantasy, or faith in fantasy, or the fantasy of faith, maybe for some. It is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I am a Catholic priest, but I just recently started writing a fantasy novel, and you should have seen the faces of my parishioners when I told them. They thought I was making up my homilies, but this was definitely worse. And for a lot of them, it is something that they don't see as being part of the same universe. And I think that's not just my parishioners. I think that a lot of people, both from the fantasy community or from the faith community, may see the other F word as something that they don't feel that's compatible. And yet here we are with a couple of hosts of the co-hosts of this panel to talk specifically about that, about the way this relationship between faith and fantasy. And of course, some of you already know everyone here on the panel, but for others, our panelists may be completely new. And so I propose that we do a quick round so that every panel member introduces him or herself, but also already answers this question: how, for you, do faith and fantasy relate? Sister, may I start with you, please?
Sure. So my name is Sister Allison Regina. I'm a daughter of St. Paul. I'm also an acquisitions editor at Pauline Books and Media, which is the publishing house of the Daughters of St. Paul, and an author. So I've written several kids' books, and I also write novels for young adults. And my first one that I did is The Curse He Chose, which is a vampire novel. So yeah, there's definitely some fantastical elements going on there, as vampires are not real. And if that is news to you that they are not real, I'm so sorry to burst your bubble.
I'm so relieved.
So yeah, I mean, I've definitely gotten that question too before, like, why is a nun writing about vampires? Shouldn't you be writing about the saints or something? And but for me, fantasy and faith can be so intimately connected when you look at how God is ultimately the most creative persons that ever existed, and he made our imaginations, he gave us that faculty, and he wants us to use it. And so fantasy is something that I think it can be a really great tool for exploring our faith more deeply, and for coming to understand creation and all of the creations of our imagination more deeply with God at our side, if we let it. I mean, it's to me, it's something neutral. Like, it could also be abused or used badly or twisted for bad purposes as well. Like, I'm not saying that all fantasy things are going to help you with your faith, but fantasy can be a great way of helping us see the truth more clearly by helping us step away from our ordinary mundane lives and into the fantastical, re-enchanting ourselves with wonder, being able to see the deeper reality of things that kind of lies below the surface that sometimes gets lost in our ordinary life.
Thank you. Matthew, what about you?
I'm Matthew Quinn. I have a variety of hats with the work that I do, but I'm a part-time teacher at a Catholic plus school. I am the founder of the Catholic blog, The Simple Catholic. I also run an Instagram channel with the same name, and I love reading fantasy. I love the fact that it takes you to a different world. I see fantasy and faith being connected. They don't need to be separated. It's a way to, as Sister said, God is creative, and when we engage in fantasy and read about it and write it, it's a way to engage in that work that God, or ability that God has given us. And so I don't see it as being as a chasm between them. I think they can be connected. There's great value in that.
Thank you. There are a few gremlins on the connection there. It's breaking up a little bit, but we were able to get the gist of what you were sharing. I see another panel member, but I don't know exactly who that is, so my apologies. It's not Thomas. It's not Dominic. It's not Sister. It's not Matthew. So
Oh, so this is if Mrs. Mary? Are you referring to
Mary.
Mary Father? Okay, Mary is one of the mentors in Legend Fiction. She hosts the
Awesome.
Stories Live group, and she's written a bunch of her own novels, and all-around epic human being.
So Mary, pleased to meet you.
Thanks,
Tell us about your story.
Well, thank you for the great introduction. And yes, I write fantasy right now. And in the past, I used to write about my spiritual journey on my website before, during, and after the 19 months I spent in the convent. That was 10 years ago now. And I've been happily, I realized after discerning that I was called to married life and to write novels. So now my faith is still very important and essential to who I am. But I'm expressing that in my books. I think that fantasy it really is very complementary to talking about issues of the faith because it helps us to put it into more of a tangible form. I write books for teens. So to express different like spiritual truths or just things about real life, sometimes it's easier to talk about it in like a story format. Like there's like a dragon in my story that comes and represents a bunch of different things in the story, evil or whatever it is going on. And but also since like faith is about that creativity of God and like a culture of life, you would expect that if our faith is alive and active, it would be bearing fruit and we'd be producing more and new things, because that's just part of faith. And so stories are one part of that.
Fantastic. Thomas, you are a very serious man. What is your fantasy link? Why are you here?
So yeah, my name is Thomas Salerno. I'm a children's book author and also a podcaster. Among the podcasts that I host is The Secrets of Middle-earth on the StarQuest Production Network, and I have been a fan of the works of J.R.R. Tolkien since I was 13 years old when I discovered them, when the Peter Jackson movie, I'm dating myself, but that's when the Peter Jackson movies were coming out, and I was so intrigued by this concept that I went out and bought paperback copies of the trilogy at my local bookstore, and I was never the same after that. And I feel like the Lord of the Rings, especially, and the fantasy of J.R.R. Tolkien had a huge impact on my own faith and spiritual journey. I'm a cradle Catholic, was raised in a very devout home, but I feel that like experiencing the world of Middle-earth and discovering all of its connections, specifically to Catholicism, really helped me deepen my own appreciation for my faith, and really drew me into thinking about the faith in ways that I hadn't really considered before. It's really one of those books that has shaped my worldview and how I view the world, and so I feel that fantasy has the power to do that, especially the kinds of fantasy that takes place in what are sometimes called in the business, secondary worlds, where it's an imaginary world that is maybe separate from our own, or maybe our own world in a time so far gone that it's essentially the same thing as if it were another world. And we can see our world and the kinds of people who we encounter in real life through the lens of these fantasy adventures. And really, one of the most important spiritual lessons that I think specifically Lord of the Rings taught me was that power of empathy for other people, and that power of mercy and empathy, and just being able to, even if you don't agree with what other people are doing or saying, that power of empathy, of just connecting and trying to understand, and kind of putting out a hand in friendship rather than like a fist in opposition. And I feel like that's one of the things that's just shaped my worldview ever since I started thinking deeply about fantasy after reading Lord of the Rings.
Awesome. And finally, Dominic, what about you?
Yeah, thank you. Such good responses. I'm trying to think what I'm going to add to this whole thing. So, okay, so here's a thought, and then I'll let myself out to the firing squad afterwards. But I think that a lot of times when we approach our faith, we bring to our understanding of the faith the culture in which we live. And invariably, a culture will normalize a set of ideas and practices and fan fiction and ideas and whatever. And then there will be a bunch that we've not paid attention to, either because it was bad at one point, or we don't know what to do with it, or it's confusing or something. And the value, I think, of fantasy fiction is that it can sort of unplug you from everything that you tell yourself is good and normal and true. I'm not saying that's not that, you know, you shouldn't be associating with what's good and normal and true, but you also have to ask the question, do I know everything? Am I in contact with all of reality as it actually is, or how much of my biases are also in play? And not in a negative sense, in the sense of there's nothing you can do. You're raised on everything that is given to you, and then you are supposed to grow beyond that or grow into that. So fantasy fiction flexes your imaginative ability to be able to see more and learn more, because it stress tests the edges of the frontiers of what you think, and it puts it in different points of view, so that when truth shows up to you in the face of a stranger or in a strange and weird situation, you've already kind of practiced maybe the ability to welcome angels in disguise, and to welcome the Holy Spirit appearing under, you know, like a mask or something, inviting you out of everything safe and normal back out into the wilds, so that you can then bring good things from the wilds back into the safe and normal for everybody else. I think that's something as storytellers, something we bring to this conversation is an ability to be like the forager who goes out beyond the walls of the playground or the walls of the castle, out into the wilds, explore things, test new mushrooms and berries and whatever, find new cliffs and caves, and then you bring it back for everybody else to enrich their understanding of the world, because the world doesn't end at, you know, the edge of the castle walls. But a lot of us can think it does. And then when some stranger walks through the gates, we don't know how to connect with them because we have never played with the idea of how to.
That's a very fascinating perspective, which we will probably also discuss a bit later. I mean, it's this whole idea of, you know, if you live only your life without reading, you live one life. If you read, especially if you read fantasy, you can live hundreds of lives, and that all will inform your experience of life, your thinking, the choices you make, and maybe also your experience of faith. And we are all authors here on the panel, and later on I will ask each of you to tell us a little bit more with an example how you combine fantasy and faith in your own works. But before that, we're also all readers. We're also all lovers of stories. Can you give me an example of something you read in a fantasy novel, in a book that's not the Bible, that has impacted your faith or has helped you to maybe look at your faith from a different angle or discover something about your faith? While you think about that, let me start first. I remember that when I was 10, maybe, I watched Star Wars in the theater. Now, Star Wars is basically also fantasy, but has also spaceships, so it's a bit confusing. Back then, as a child, it didn't really bother me. I loved fairy tales. I loved Luke Skywalker's lightsabers and whatnot. But I remember that was not the first movie I saw in theaters. The first movie I saw was Jesus Christ Superstar. And that changed my entire view of the Bible, because all of a sudden I could see it. And oftentimes, especially when you're a child, and I was an altar boy, and a lot of the readings just went way over my head. It was in a language that I didn't understand. But seeing Jesus, even though this was a pretty funky Jesus dancing around with his apostles, but nevertheless, it was filmed in the Holy Land. And so all of a sudden it became so close to home. And then only a month later, I think I saw Star Wars, and then Luke Skywalker was another kind of Jesus-like figure to me. But what was so appealing was that I think that was actually the seed of my vocation. I saw a farm boy who became a Jedi and who went literally for the stars, who expanded his horizon and embraced a calling to go and stand up for what is good and protect the weak and fight what was evil. And I remember as a child, so all of a sudden it clicked what the Bible was trying to teach me. It's like, you too, you are also called. And well, the disappointment was, of course, that when I entered seminary, there were no lightsabers. Still waiting for mine, but the rest was all there. It was like, yes, I still feel like I'm a little bit like Luke Skywalker. And so this whole idea of that life is more than a sequence of events, but that life is something that calls you to something outside of you, a greater ideal, something you can actually give your life to entirely. I think that started with Star Wars. And so having just come out of Jesus Christ Superstar, there was a very small gap to jump between the two, and it all fused into who I am right now. Who else wants to give an example?
I know that I kind of make a little bit of fun of people who are just like, oh, my favorite book is Narnia or The Lord of the Rings, just because like all Catholics seem to like those books. But I really do love them. And I have to say that the Chronicles of Narnia did really shape me a lot as a person. Like, they were one of the youngest like books that my mom read to me when I was like 4 years old. She read me all of them. I was terrified of the White Witch for years. I still am, actually, now that I think about it. But soon before I entered the convent, I read them again for the first time as an adult. And there was a quote that really stuck with me, which I think is a pretty popular quote, but it was talking about Aslan, who is the lion, who is Jesus, in case you're not familiar. And it was someone saying, like, of course he isn't safe, but he's good. Like, he's not a tame lion. And that just struck me so deeply as far as like really resonating with my personal relationship with Jesus at the time, of him calling me into religious life, into this scary new adventure, and having no idea what that was going to be. And hearing some people talk about Jesus like he never asks anything of anybody, and he's just, oh, he's nice, yeah, okay, whatever. That was not the Jesus that I knew in my prayer, but it was the Jesus that I saw in Narnia, and it really helped me to feel like, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, C.S. Lewis is a very well-loved, reputable, respectable author, and he had a similar kind of relationship with God, but also that all of the readers over the years who have really resonated with those stories and really fallen in love with Jesus through the character of Aslan, really just helped me feel like I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who notices that Jesus can be scary sometimes, and sometimes he wants you to go on a dark adventure that was not what you wanted, but you have to do it anyway because he's God and he's in charge, and he knows what's best, but you don't know that it's best until you actually walk out on the dark path. And so it was rereading the Chronicles of Narnia that really helped me kind of, as I was making that transition into religious life, to kind of be brave enough to keep following along where he went, and falling in love with him more deeply.
Awesome.
That idea of the dangerous call to adventure is also something that I've thought a lot about, especially in the context of The Hobbit and Bilbo Baggins, because out of all of Tolkien's hobbits, I probably identify the most with Bilbo, because he likes to sit at home and read his books and look at his maps and to be just generally kind of comfortable and safe and not have to take any risks. And Gandalf just blusters into his life like a hurricane, upends everything. There's all these dwarves everywhere. And before he knows what right side up is, he's out on this adventure that he never planned and never wanted. And yet Bilbo grows so much as a person over the course of this adventure. He's really changed. Even Gandalf notices it by the time, he comes back to Hobbiton. And I've just always, it's something that I've taken to prayer quite a bit, in terms of asking Jesus, what adventure are you calling me to that I've been resisting? And that I've been telling you, like, no, I don't want to do that. Leave me alone. I just want to read my books and drink my coffee. But please don't ask me to do this. So it's like it's been very helpful in prayer to kind of take what I've discovered in Bilbo's story and sort of I do a lot of prayer journaling. That's the way I communicate best with God, I've found. And so, yeah, that's been very fruitful for me.
Now, don't go invisible during this panel, please.
No.
Go ahead, Matthew. You were going to say something?
Reading The Hobbit, my kids, we fight. We're finishing it. It's actually been a journey. It's been like 2 years actually finishing the book because we went straight time without being able to read it to our schedule. But we're it's that has a book that's been impacted me. Just how Bilbo changes throughout the story, and also there's so many characters in that book that you relate to, and you relate to them at different times. And it's really nice to says each will for my own kids.
Hey, Matthew.
Especially when they were,
Matthew, I'm really sorry to interrupt. I don't know if everybody else is having a hard time hearing, but the connection is quite rough. Matthew, could you try switching off the video? That might prioritize the audio, and then we can capture more of what you're saying. Really sorry. Thanks for trying that. All right, could you just repeat that again? 'Cause it sounded really cool.
Yeah, is my audio off now?
Oh, so much better.
And the audio is
okay.
better. Yeah.
Okay, maybe that was the issue. Yeah, so the irony is that it's been kind of an unexpected journey of reading the book because I started like 4 years ago reading it, then just life happened and we didn't finish it. So then I, like 2 years ago, started rereading it from the very beginning. And we made a lot of progress, and then we got interrupted again, but I'm finally making a point to finish like the last 2 chapters of the book. But it's been very fruitful to, teach my kids about, the faith, but without it, directly, talking about, the faith in a preachy way. But it's a really fantasy is a great way to look at the characters and see the virtue that they exhibit or don't exhibit at times. And 2 other book series that I've enjoyed reading when I was younger and want to eventually reread.
Oh, I think we've lost Matthew. What a cliffhanger!
Yeah.
What are
No,
those
yeah.
books?
Oh.
I think he just put on the invisibility ring. I thought it was going to be Thomas, but yeah. Well, maybe he'll jump on, and we will get the answer to what those 2 books are. Maria, what about you?
I'm glad I got more time to think about it. There's so many different examples, but the one that I'm thinking about has to do with how I felt this year writing my latest novel, Green Blade. There's the part in the first Star Wars movie with Obi-Wan is fighting Darth Vader, and then he says, "Strike me down, and I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine."
Yes.
Do you want me to keep going, or should we switch back?
Yeah, sure. We can get back to Matthew.
Okay.
So strike me down, and I will become more powerful. What appealed to you in that Obi-Wan Kenobi quote?
Well, it's like this, like it's Obi-Wan's when after he dies, then he's be able to help Luke in a different way, in a more powerful way, and it makes me think of like in the scripture where it says like powers make perfect in weakness. And this year I've been dealing with a lot of health issues, and as I was writing the book, I would like go through each day and like my brain feels like mush, and I can't make dinner for the kids, but I'm still writing something for the book, and I don't even know how that's happening. But then whenever I go into prayer, I just like felt like the Lord's like, I'm taking care of everything you need, and I just want you to keep being faithful to it and keep writing. And it's just like me feeling like I'm becoming weaker is making the book stronger, because then it's more what God wants to say in the book than what I want the book to say.
Wow. So
And
writing
that's
for you
coming
is
from
also
Star Wars,
ritual.
so there you go.
Yeah. Nice. Very well. Dominic, I'm sure you have some thoughts about this as well.
Well, unfortunately, everybody stole any topic that I might want to have picked, like
I'll ask
Narnia
you
and
first the next
Lord of the
time.
Rings. No. Ask me at the end. It's fine. So I think the two that I would like to reference that really stand out to me are two modern titles that actually kind of build out my initial point. So one is actually Game of Thrones, and the other one is the new Avatar series by James Cameron. And then here's why. I think what's interesting about Game of Thrones, and let's get past the R rating and all of the stupid stuff that happens, the meta level stuff that's happening at the level of the whole story. I think it's actually a really good story. And why? It's because the irony of the title of Game of Thrones is that it's like playing a game of musical chairs on the Titanic. You are not paying attention to what is actually going on in reality. The fact that there's this wall and there's this eternal zombie army that's coming. It's not just potential. It's like it's actually coming, and you're not paying attention to reality. And you've relied for so long on the rituals and liturgies that maintain that wall that you've completely forgotten why they're maintained. And you're playing musical chairs on the Titanic with all the different stupid stuff that goes up, and nobody's cultivating a virtuous life, and nobody's preparing how to strengthen the realms and save all the people and stuff. And then of course it all breaks through, and I think that's the point of the whole story, is how that moment when the zombie is brought in front of is it Cersei all the way in the last season, and she cannot believe what she is seeing. And then the turning of the dragon at the end. That I find is such a phenomenal metaphor. I have no idea if this is what the author intended. It's my read on the whole story. Almost all of us, with the mega Game of Thrones that we play on the international level of the family community, international family, we're playing the same kind of Game of Thrones, and all of the angels, the good ones and the problematic ones and the bad ones and all of this that are on the edges of everything, we've completely forgotten why we maintain all the liturgies and the rituals and the practices and the sacramentals. We completely forgot. And we don't keep them up. And so the few who take the black, key being father and sister here, who take the black, to let go the rest of the world and promise to stand vigil on these walls for the sake of the rest of the human family, well, they're completely unappreciated, misunderstood, and all of this. So that's kind of the negative sense. Just, I've only seen the whole thing through once and I've not read the books. That really impacted me as a way to think about, are we paying attention as we keep building a future we believe in? Are we paying attention to what's outside the walls? What are we missing here? Because stuff you miss comes back and bites you like a thief in the night, in the dark. And the other one, Avatar, this is a bit more of a positive take on the same sort of idea. All of these horrible materialist, capitalist, whatevers, they go to this beautiful planet. And this planet is, okay, it's a sci-fi, so on. But it's trying to share an idea of like how to feel or how to live when you are in connection with or engaged with an enchanted, alive world. So they've got Awa, which is like, I don't know, it's like an anagram for Yahweh, I think. They're in communication with God, with a higher being, with an angel or something like this. And these are people who live in harmony with their environment, with themselves, and all of the stuff that we try to bring. It's like, hooray, you've got soda and I don't know, what are some other stupid examples of stuff we love? I don't know. Showers. Well, that's not stupid. That's actually really important. Microwaves and, candy and whatever. You've got all these things like, okay, great. Hooray. You did that. And big spaceships. But are you actually making yourself into a better human being who is more in contact or in better connection with reality? Not just your opinion of reality, but actual reality. And the whole story is, of course, the conversion. And both stories are the conversions of these people who, these heroes who begin to recognize in a very Star Wars kind of sense, what I thought was true is not. And now I have to radically change and adapt because this world, I want to be this. I want the reasons for the hope that these people have. So from these are stories that are incredibly impactful and they have boiled the world. And I don't think they even intended to be intentionally religious or faithful or anything like this. But in a sort of back way, they open doors, I think, in us by testing our imaginations, getting us to think and rethink about things. And it's with those kind of open doors in your imagination that the Holy Spirit can get in, that your garden goes back, your imagination goes back to being that community garden that the angels are also planting stuff in, as opposed to, when we brick it over so that nothing can get in anymore. If that was coherent, chat, please let me know. If anybody wants to reply to that, I'd welcome that.
You mentioned that you don't know if that is intended by the author, but that's how you read those stories. And I think you touched upon something very important. Storytelling is a form of art. And like other forms of art, it always has a transcendent dimension, something that goes beyond the intentions of the author. That is why it's art. It's not, here's A, here is B, we go from A to B. No, you can figure out yourself how you walk in this world that is created. And thankfully so, because it is an indication, I think, that when we create, we are what Tolkien would call, we're co-creators. We're never the source, but we are made in the image of God. So when we tell stories, we do what God does. I mean, he created the world through his word. Jesus was one of the most phenomenal storytellers there ever has been. And so, and this is something that I heard several of you mention, that when you create your stories, be it about, I don't know, UFOs and secret military, whatever fantasy, military fantasy, or about vampires who may not exist but still have to experience something and can teach us something. When this creativity works through you, it literally goes through you. So it also changes you or affects you. Can you tell me from your own experience a little bit, have you examples of how that works? How do you sit down and come up with a story? I'm very curious, obviously, about the combination of vampires and faith, but I'm sure that's creating a story like that requires you to step into that world and to be receptive to what God wants to share to the world through your story.
Yeah, I think for me, since I'm the one who writes about vampires,
I didn't know that. No.
Well, a lot of my writing is very closely related to my prayer life that's like in chapel with the Liturgy of the Hours or Eucharistic adoration, but also whenever I'm writing, like just by myself doing my writing time, I'm also doing that with Jesus. Like I feel like Jesus is there with me. I talk with him all the time about what I'm working on and kind of what direction he wants to take it. When something is wrong, it's usually because I wasn't listening to him, and then I stop and he's like, yep, delete that scene, go back. I'm like, okay. And that fixes it.
Jesus is basically your structural editor there.
Yeah, basically. He's my co-author, but putting Jesus's name as the author as the title of my book seems kind of cocky in a different way. I don't know. But so for me, it's very closely related. And the way that I tie Catholic things into my stories, I think, is just a natural outgrowth from the way I see the world, from the prayer that I'm doing all the time, from really believing that God exists and he acts in the world and that the church is real and it matters that you're a part of it. And so that bleeds into my stories, whether I am intentionally trying to stick it there or not, it shows up. And so I think for me, it's one of those things where it's like, I can trust that that's gonna happen. It's gonna be there. There's gonna be deeper meaning in the stories that I write, because those are the kinds of questions that I'm grappling with too. And a lot of why I write is to learn the answers to that myself, like for these questions that I struggle with, and kind of exploring that through a story or through these other characters helps me work out a lot of things in my relationship with God, my relationships with other people, what I think about what's going on in the world today through the stories in these fictional settings.
Do you have an example of something you learned through in this creative process, maybe through some of your protagonists or something they go through?
Yeah, one thing, I'm working right now on a sci-fi novel that involves the church being persecuted. And I think that it's a way of me like looking at a lot of things happening in our world today where there are lots of countries where it is really dangerous to be Catholic or to believe in God openly or to share your faith with others. But even in our country, in some different ways, it can be disadvantageous to be openly a faith-filled person in society. And I get afraid. Like, I am a nun. People can automatically tell that I'm Catholic, but I find the idea of martyrdom very scary. I find that question of like, well, what would I do if I was like under threat of torture, told to like, you know, profess my faith or deny it? Like, I don't know what I would do. That's something that I have often wondered about or thought about or grappled with and, you know, prayed for people who are in those situations. And so in this story, I'm able to explore characters who are in those situations and kind of see, okay, how are they handling this? Or is it even really about them? Or is it about the way that God is strengthening them in these situations? Or, you know, just kind of grappling with those different questions in a very literal way in the story, because probably, I mean, I don't want to say with 100% certainty, but probably I'm not actually going to be burnt at the stake for being Catholic during my lifetime. But I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can experience persecution, and I want to be someone who boldly stands up for my faith even when I'm a little bit scared. So writing a story like this gives me the courage to actually do that in real life because I've already explored it through my characters.
Very cool. Thomas, when you are writing your stories, I mean, I've gotten to know you as someone who is always kind of reflecting on your faith, on the stories that you tell, and also you do a lot of thinking about the creative process, and you're very open about that. Creativity works different for every person. Not an author. Each author is different. The process is different, and sometimes you just have to wait and give it time. And can you tell us a little bit about your creative process and how that connects to your religious experience?
Yeah, and it's fun. This is something I was talking with family about just today, like this morning, where I've struggled a lot with this because I think as a creative person, I have this desire to share my words with other people and have people read them and enjoy them and maybe even get something out of them. But at the end of the day, I have to realize that these projects, these stories, that in a way they're not totally mine. You know, they have to be God's first, in a way that, like, I find that when I write stories and very easily it becomes my project, my thing, you know, like Gollum with the ring almost, you know, it's a mine, you know, like he's like precious, because I want that control over it, and you know, like, and it needs to be perfect. It needs to be perfect the first time, you know, and that's when I stumble. That's when, and I don't call it writer's block, I call it page fright, because it's, for me, it's a kind of performance anxiety, like stage fright, where it's like, when I just let myself write something that maybe I'm not even thinking about it being for public consumption, then it just flows naturally out of me. Like this novella that I finished this year, this science fiction thriller, I never planned initially to share that with anybody. That was just a fun thing that a writer friend and I were doing. He was letting me play in his sandbox world and write a story based in his setting, and it just took off. And I just you know, and Catholic, you know, like religious themes came in the revisions, and I didn't consciously write the first draft expecting it to be any more than a kind of fun science fiction thriller. But yeah, I've wrestled often with this idea of like, why am I doing this? Why am I writing these stories? Because if it's just about me, and to be like, oh, look, you know, like, the worst thing you can do, I found, is compare yourself to other writers. Yeah. Like, do not do that. My advice is, If you compare yourself to other writers, stop. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200, as we would say in Monopoly. Do not do that. Because honestly, I am so amazed with what some of my peers are able to do. And like you, Father Roderick, generate a story seemingly every day, and they're brilliant. And I'm just like, okay, that's amazing. I can't possibly do that. So it's like, it's like where I have to give myself permission to work at my own pace and know that God is not expecting anything from me in that sense. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I can feel like you get in that trap where it's like, I'm doing all this for God, so I need to be constantly producing. And it's like, God doesn't need anything from you in that way. He wants you to be fully alive, to have, as Saint Irenaeus, I believe, says, like to have the joy of living. And so I feel like when I get away from that primarily creation should be about joy and about, the joy of because God creates, not because he needs to create anything, but just his joy overflows. And because so I just feel like whenever I get away from that source, I get stuck.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, creativity is the end of all joy. And I love how you combine the creative act to something that should generate joy. And the moment you are in that joy, it's easy to step out of the boat and walk over the water. And then sometimes we look down and like, what the heck am I doing here?
Yeah.
Thinking.
Yeah.
And I love what you say that when God created, he did not just create Earth and then let's put we need a source of heat and then maybe some stars and that's it. No, there is more universe, there are more galaxies than a human eye will ever see. What's the point? Well, there is no point. It's just because God is infinite creativity that that's what's reflected in all those stars. And we don't see most of God's creation. We will never see it. But I just think that God just created out of the sheer joy of being able to get it out there. And so if that's the core spirituality that we live in as authors, I think the story will flow. This may be also the secret to, for instance, Tolkien's just impossible, how do you say that? Productivity. For decades he's been creating this world, and most of what he did was not supposed to be published. And it's thanks to Christopher that we are able to read it, and I'm constantly amazed, like, where does this come from? And well, it's maybe because there was someone who was working through him. Maria, what about you? Oh, Matthew is back. Sorry, Matthew, I have you on the other monitor, but let me, Matthew, you were so rudely interrupted. We were still hoping to hear the 2 books that have influenced you. You may want to unmute because we don't hear you.
Oh, I clicked the button and then I clicked it again on my touchscreen. So Redwall, that series, I really enjoy, and I'm very much an analytical person. I would have I don't know if this is weird or not or normal, but I would take like a notebook and categorize all the characters. And I just found a great joy of and I learned a lot about various animals I never even heard of in that, but I thought it was such a rich world that it really, and I read it when I was like maybe 12, 13, 14. It was just a rich world. And then the other series that I just remembered that I didn't mention the first time is the Artemis Fowl series. What I loved about that series is he took such a different take on so many like traditional, fantasy creatures, and he added like the science and the like technology aspect to like magic. And that's something that I think was fairly new, I think, with what he did, back in the early 2000s with that series. And, a new take on what a dwarf is, completely different than what, you know, Tolkien's dwarves are, just completely different. And, you know, you know, again, that's a world you entered in, and, you know, to see and explore. I mean, the main series is about Artemis being, you know, a villain as a 12-year or a 10-year-old, and eventually transforming. Like, that's the thing that, you know, is really powerful. That I mean, he's one of the characters that I just am fascinated by, with his transformation from being this supreme, you know, I mean, he's a villain, but he's the main character. Like, that's not typical of like a series. It's not uncommon, but it's definitely like not the norm to have the main character from the onset be like very villainous and like display like all of these undesirable characteristics. But eventually, by the 7th book, he, you know, you see there's growth in him. And then, so those are two real key books that I've, you know, read. And The Wizard of Oz is another series that I enjoy. I like revisiting. I read, you know, a couple of those to my kids as they were you know, several years ago. Hope to reread them again, but they're a really great series. And there's a lot of interesting things in the series that most people just think it's about, you know, the first book, but there's actually 13 books in the series, and there's a lot of like interesting things that he, you know, did. And it's a great introduction to fantasy, I think, The Wizard of Oz. It's written for, you know, a very young age, but those are 3 series that I enjoyed.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Maria, you shared that you had your share of health issues, and yet you kept writing. And could you tell us a little bit about your creative process, and how do you even do that when you're feeling miserable, when you're feeling lousy, and then yet there's something that compels you to write? How does that work? And before you answer, let me ask Dominic, if you can you take a look at the chat, what's going on there, because it's on a different monitor, so I'm unable to take a look at what's happening there, but maybe you can bring in some of the comments later after Maria is done. Is that
Sure.
okay?
Happy to.
Yeah, so I think that for me, the writing is like, it's like a way for me to find healing, and a way to, it's like the thing that I can always do. Even if what I wrote sounds like garbage, and I can still do it. And the more that I do it, even on days when it doesn't turn out very good, then it's like, even though it seems like nothing else really happened that day, except maybe I drank like 2 cups of water or something, that was a major achievement. I got this story. I've written this book, and that is like, it helps a lot when you're going through time, when you're feeling really down a lot, to have that. Say, well, I made something new.
And how
And
does
I
that
think that sometimes,
fuel you?
yeah, there's the joy, you know, like when you can't really find it anywhere else, then it's good. Found it there. It's a little light in the dark, I guess.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's you say something really important there, that it doesn't really matter where you are and what the circumstances are. The creative process basically has no boundaries. I've always been fascinated by what Tolkien writes on fairy stories or on fairy tales, and probably Dominic has written an entire book about that, so he'd be more the guy to talk about that. But I remember one passage where he says, trying to explain why fantasy is so important, and he says, well, imagine you're in a prison, and the only thing you can see are the walls of the prison, and it's miserable, the food is miserable, and it's cold, and the guards are terrible. But then you have the power of imagination. You have a fantasy story that makes you dream about a different world, without walls, without guards, without the bars, and And the story has the power to give someone hope way beyond what you could even expect. It is able to free you, even if you are in a situation where humanly, physically, your world is very small or very painful. And I always love that, because it reminds me also that in times where I've struggled with a lot and went through really difficult times in my life, stories were worlds where I could kind of truly be myself. Like if I could walk around in, I don't know, the Star Wars galaxy, or in my imagination, even inside video games, I would just walk around. I have this online Lord of the Rings game, and I would just walk around in the Shire. I wouldn't play because I'm lousy at playing video games, but I would just take my pony, and I'm always a hobbit in the game, and I would just go and tour the various villages of the Shire, and then it is as if all the trouble, all the worries that I had just disappear. Is that escapism, or is it maybe just a gift that God gives us, this power to be transported to a world that is closer maybe to what God wishes for us and intends for us ultimately? Anyway.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah,
what
it's
is
a good
the
escape
chat?
if it's escapism.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in a way, even prayer is a form of escapism, in the sense that we shut down our phone and we step out of we go to the chapel. That is in a way escaping the pressures of life, and then God takes us into his world. And oftentimes I think of what I'm going to cook next, but that's my problem. Dom, what is the chat saying? What are
everyone's having
viewers
fun chatting about Redwall and Artemis Fowl and all of this, but there are a couple of comments. I just want to read them out loud. And I like this. There's one here from Julia. She says, I've heard it said quite frequently that in the end, you write for two people, yourself and God. Yeah, you want your story to take off and get a fandom and all that cool stuff, but you shouldn't lose sight of the beauty of writing for the sake of others. Quick fire, just going around this panel. You got 30 seconds as we start to wrap up this conversation. What do you think about that line when somebody says you write for two people, yourself and God? Let's start with Sister Allison. What's your knee-jerk reaction to that thought?
I don't know. I mean, I do write for myself and God in the beginning, but there comes a point when I want to share my story with others for it to do a greater good, and also give them the opportunity to engage with it too. And at that point, I do start thinking about the reader and what they need to enjoy the story, and what I need to put into that story so that they can fully engage in it too. And just reminds me of something Pope Francis said in his, I think it's called like the letter of formation, or literature and the role of formation, or something like that. Mm-hmm. But how as soon as a reader engages with the story, they make it their own. Like it's no longer just the author's creation, it becomes something that is newly created from the reader too. And so for me, that's always important to remember that, like, okay, I'm making this story for myself. I'm enjoying it now. And there's plenty of stories I will never share with anybody except me and Jesus. But for those stories that I do choose to publish or share with others, it's like, okay, time for me to let it go, be detached, let them engage with it on their own terms and make it their own. And then new beautiful things can grow out of that too.
Well, all right, everybody, we can all go home then. Matthew, if you want anything you would like to add to that thought?
Yeah, when I started writing my blog, it was mostly due to it was an act of prayer. It was twofold. It was to educate people. And so in that sense, I was writing for, I guess, three people. God, me and God, I guess, to prayer, to deal with things I was going through personally. And then I was also wanting to share things I was learning in the classroom with others. So I didn't have like a specific person in mind, but there were some things that I wrote about as it related to sharing the faith, and things that I just enjoy. I love, I personally love games and board games and playground games. I wrote a whole article about tetherball and how it teaches about theology. I was just obsessed with that for like a few weeks, but I was writing to share it. I never had a chance to share it with my students. So to me, I do like that point. I think when you start writing, it should be seen as a prayer.
Mhm.
Connecting kind of another point, I've been learning more and more about like icons and iconography, and the phrase that they use is to write it. I've had multiple people, I've interviewed them on my blog about some iconographists, and they talk about writing it. It's a prayer. So I think creativity is a prayer. That's something I didn't really know like years ago until as I started writing myself, but it really is. It's a conversation with you and God. So God, it should be first and foremost God. But as Sister mentioned, you do want to share it with others because, love is about loving God and loving your neighbor. And the work that we do should do both. It might start with God, but it'll end with God and our neighbor.
Nice. Thank you, Matthew. Mary, can I pick on you
Yep.
next? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would echo, both of what Sister said and what Matthew said. Yeah, like I do start with God, my writing for me and for God first, but yeah, I think it's something that's meant to be shared. It's supposed to be the good fruit of what you've contemplated, and you want to share it with the world. It's also like loving God isn't like Matthew said. I really liked what you said about like loving God is not just in loving Him like in that individual relationship, but also loving Him in the people that God has placed around us. That's how we can show God that we love Him, by loving other people who we don't always love everything that they do to us, but that's how we can love like God, because we do things that annoy God, I'm sure, but He still loves us. So yeah, that's the other part of loving God, is loving our neighbor, and so we can share the things that we've written as one little thing that we can do.
Thank you.
Way.
Thomas, any follow-up to those points?
Yeah, I just agree with what everyone has said so far. And practically how this usually works for me is that I like I said at the start, I read a lot. I'm a voracious reader. And a lot of times I will take the latest book that I've read to my prayer journal and sort of try to work out what spiritual lessons I can learn from the latest thing that I've read, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And that's where a lot of the articles and essays that I write come from. It starts as a conversation with God or an exploration with Him of something that I've read in my prayer journal. And then the fruit of that becomes something that I can share with other people. And as I'm thinking about it right now, I should really try this technique with my fiction as well, because I think it might it might bear a lot of good fruit that way. But certainly most of the nonfiction that I have written has started out that way. It's just me committing thoughts to my prayer journal and really asking God, like, what do you make of this? And what can I learn from this? So it's really when I write it, for me, it's a learning. Writing is a learning experience. I'm always learning, and I feel like that's such an important part of our spiritual journey as well.
Thank you, Thomas. Father, any closing thoughts on that?
I always, I think I always write for my younger self. I grew up with fairy tales when I slept with my brother in the attic, and before we went to bed, either my mother or my father would sit on the bed, open this big Reader's Digest best fairy tale book of the world or whatever it was, and would read as a fairy tale. And for a long time, I always imagined later on when I have kids, I will do the same. Because I remember how incredibly important those stories were, and how it would always kind of like put me to sleep with my mind in a different world. And so I always imagine, later on when I'm a dad, I will read the story to my kids. Well, I don't have kids. I'm a priest. God had other plans. But I still, when I write, I'm often writing for, like, I'm telling a story to, let's say, 12-year-old Father Roderick, or I wasn't Father Roderick, I was just Roderick, or 18-year-old Rod. What is a story that he needs to hear? What can I put in there that can help him to face reality? And there's always a lot of things that happened in my life, things that I've learned that I try to put in the experiences of my characters. And I think by doing that, I hope that I'm also writing for future generations, that I'm passing on things that I've experienced, that I've learned, that God has helped me understand. And then instead of keeping it to myself, I feel like this is a talent that I need to not put in the ground, but I need to multiply it. I need to let other people in. And sometimes I feel a bit like Willy Wonka, who is like opening the doors of the chocolate factory. I didn't make all that, wonderful stuff. I'm just the current director of that stuff. But I love to invite people into that world of pure imagination and just go and do whatever you need to do there. And maybe in the future, some other kid will read my story and think, oh my gosh, I want to write a story like that. I want to become a storyteller. Or maybe we'll find some spark in there that puts him or her on the path of God. And whether or not that will happen, that's not up to me. Like what many of you said, it's you write, you share, but then the story, the art that you create becomes your audience's story, and they will make it their own. And that's a good thing, because everything we do as creators, as storytellers, is just passing on what we have received. It's very similar to what happens in the Eucharist. You receive not to keep it for yourself, but to hand it out, to share it, so it multiplies. This turned into a homily. That was not my intention. Thank you all so much for joining me on this panel. Also, a big thank you to all of you that have been following our conversation in the chat. Of course, the chat will end when this panel ends, but it's not the end of the conversation. You can always keep sharing in the community of Legend Fiction.
And I'm going to be really annoying and interrupt you, because you're right. It's not the end of the conversation. I didn't realize I was muted. I want my turn at the mic. Give me 2 seconds, everybody. So,
sure.
Okay, here's, like I said, I know it's the friendliest con, and I end up saying, I'm going to go out to the firing squad afterwards for sharing the unpopular opinions. But I'm going to be the least devout person on this panel and go, I don't actually think too much about, oh boy, I'm going to get in trouble here. This is why I strong-armed Father to meeting with me every week, because I need help. But see, I was the kid who hated my catechism classes because it was so boring. I wanted to go back and read Narnia. I wanted to go back and read Fun and look through the concept art for the Phantom Menace and all of that stuff. I literally took my big book on the catechism and I stuck it behind the TV in the living room so that nobody could find it, and I could tell my parents, I don't know where it is, I don't have to do it, right? So that probably explains a lot of things about my opinions, so I'll leave that to you to decide. What I'm trying to say is this. I love the one line, I don't remember who it was who said it. Chat, if you know this, please go ahead and say this in the chat. It's that line which is, love God and then do what you want. And I've been mulling on that for a minute.
St. Augustine.
Yeah. St. Augustine? Okay, because there's that line, you can read it in a dismissive way, maybe, which is, do whatever you want, as in it doesn't matter what you want to do. Just go ahead and do it, but make sure that you're anchoring yourself in God first. And it's like, okay, that's true too. But there's also another way maybe to read this, which is to love God and then do what you want, as in do what you do desire to do. Because if you're anchored in the fount of original, the fount of all goodness, and trusting that there's going to be guidance there, then when a story kind of arrives in you, right? I love this metaphor from Martin Shaw, where he says stories, they're a bit like, it's like if you were to imagine a beach and there's a shipwreck, maybe, and it's a shipwreck of elves, and the elves are breaking through the surf and they're trying to reach the shore. And you're there at the shore, and you're the lone curmudgeon with a hovel, and you're seeing these beautiful, maybe warriors or people come in off the, out the water, and they're staggering and they're weak and they need help. And so you bring them to your hut and you feed them and you give them soup and you nourish them and you warm them, and then they go on to do whatever else they were needing to do in their adventure. Well, stories are like that too. Stories can show up in you or in your life, and sometimes they're there for you, and sometimes they're there for somebody else. But sometimes when they arrive, you're not thinking of like, well, I'm not, so shoot me. I'm not taking it to prayer, and I probably should. I'm not taking it to spiritual direction or anything. I'm like, this is cool. Okay, I'm going to spend 100,000 words just having a pig's breakfast with this thing, and then see why this matters. So try to find out why this thing matters to me. And at the end of that process, this is why I think writing is a form of active contemplation. At the end of that process, I go, oh, maybe. I'm at the 100,000 word mark in one novel. I still don't know what it means, but it's still really powerful. Oh, this is what it's supposed to mean for me. This is important. I need to keep spending time with this. And so that sense of you can invite God into it and just recognize we're given gifts and we're given tasks and so on that are not just for our benefit. They're also for the benefit of the human family. That's why it's our Father who art in heaven. Nobody here is getting out of here alone. We get we get into heaven together. Because he is the Father together. So gifts are given to each of us for the benefit of healing and helping each other. And so if you have a cool story, I want to say sort of all of this because there's a temptation. There's the good way to do it, and then there's a temptation if you have scrupulosity, which, like I do, the scrupulosity can be, well, I can't do anything until I pray 16 rosaries and go to Mass and do a string of Holy Fridays. Like, no, if it's a cool story, write it down, have fun with it, have fun with it. That sense of joy and levity and fun is, I think, also can be, not always guaranteed, can be an indication there's something good here and it's worth fighting for, Mr. Frodo. Okay, now I'm done. Back over to you, Father, and we should probably wrap.
I have nothing to say after this.
Okay. All right, friends. If anybody is paying attention to the expo, I'm supposed to go be in my own booth right now talking about whatever else. So if anybody would like to join me there, you are welcome to. Otherwise, please have fun enjoying the rest of the expo and support all of the authors. And hey, if you haven't yet, grab the goodie bag. It is an arsenal of incredible stories from Raconteur Press and a bunch of authors involved in this community and our own storytellers who've created anthologies. Massive gift for you. Huge savings, super epic. And most of us are all faith-inspired fiction authors. So, all right. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you around the con.